Okay, today I want to give you guys the top 5 best books I've ever read, and these books are going to be different from the lists I've said before. Most of the lists I've done before are like the best books that are going to help you with this, the most interesting books, the books that are going to help you the most. These are just purely my favorite books, the books that I want to reread, that like if I had all the time in the world, I would spend all day reading. And the fifth book that I have on this list is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This is a book that I read very recently, and this is a book that the ideas keep coming back in my head time and time again. And the two key ideas from this book is the idea of the Ubermensch, or the Superman, or the man above everyone else. And it's the idea that when man doesn't conform, when man doesn't allow everything else to influence him, this is when he is capable of achieving everything that he can. This is when he reaches his potential. This is when he doesn't sell himself short. And the other idea is the idea of eternal recurrence, the idea that live your life as if you have to live it time and time and time and time again for eternity. Live your life and live it so well that you would be happy to continue with this existence for the end of time. And this is how you ensure you live a great life. This is perhaps Nietzsche's greatest book. I haven't read everything by him yet, but so far this is my favorite. And the idea that it's an allegorical story makes it that much more interesting to me, because it's one thing to say your words, but it's another to say it in poetry. It's another to say it and leave room for interpretation, because it's the interpretations where we can grasp the depth of the meaning. The next book that I want to talk about is The Red Book by Jung. This book honestly might be higher if I understood it more, but it's so deep, it's so personal, and it's so complex that like this is a book that I need to read 10 more times before I really grasp the significance of it. And to summarize this book very briefly, it's basically Jung says that if anyone, like if an outside observer sees this book, he will think it's pure madness, but it was the secret to my success. And to vastly oversimplify this book would be Jung talking to imaginary entities in his head, talking to his unconscious and figuring out the deeper aspects of his soul. It was Jung going to hell, accepting his darkness so that he could, become light, so that he could become good, embracing the darkness instead of trying to suppress it, instead of trying to, force it down and try to pretend like it doesn't exist. And really the overall goal of this book, the overall premise of the book, is Jung coming to grips with his new role in life. He had split from Sigmund Freud. Him and Freud were, basically on diametrically opposed ends of psychology, and he basically lost all of his contacts, all of his friends, and he had to start off from scratch, and he didn't know where to go. And this is really him regaining his confidence, regaining his soul, regaining what he was doing it all for, the purpose behind it, the meaning behind it. And Jung says something that's very interesting. He's like, in order for a psychologist to be the best psychologist, he has to get rid of his own issues first. He must resolve all of his own issues, because if he doesn't, he's going to project them onto his patient. And if you're projecting your own issues onto your patient, you're not hitting at the core of this. And this is the conquest, this is the journey that Jung goes through in this book. And it's really, really a beautiful book. I would suggest reading other works by Jung first, particularly Psychology and Alchemy. That's almost like a book that you must read before this, but again, a very good book. The next book, the shortest book on the list, but don't get it twisted. This is one of the deepest books you will ever read. One of my favorite quotes from the book is, "Every sorrow deepens your joy." Isn't that a beautiful quote? How can you experience happiness if you haven't experienced sadness? If every day is a good day, then it doesn't mean anything. If everything good happens to you, then you don't appreciate it. You can never know what happiness is if you don't know what sadness is. And the basic premise of this book is that there is a prophet. He's leaving his city. It's basically a symbolic death, that he's dying, and he's giving one last speech, one last word of advice to everyone in his town. And some of the questions that are asked are very simple. Some of them are very deep. Some of them will make you think, others maybe not. Maybe you're not at that stage of life, but this is a book that will give every single person in this entire world a shred of wisdom that they can take away and live a better life. And if you can say that about a book, I think it's a very good book. And it's not just the words, it's not just the wisdom, it's the the poetic elements of it. Khalil Gibran also includes his own drawings in it as well, and dude, this is a classic. And if you have like a day to spend reading this, it's a day well spent. The next book I have is my favorite Kafka book. This is The Trial by Franz Kafka. The basic idea of this book is that there's a man, he's accused of a crime. We don't really find out if he's guilty or not, but that's not the point of it. The entire point of it is to show the bureaucracy around the justice system, the bureaucracy that is involved with any legal system and any legal proceeding, and basically like if the court doesn't like you, they can always find something on you. That's the basic premise of this. And one of the most interesting takes I've ever heard is Robert Anton Wilson always talks about this. He says, Kafka could not imagine mandatory urine testing, and he has some of the most dystopian takes on the justice system. I think it's so funny to see like how far we've come, but I think this book is more important than it's ever been because it just shows how much influence each individual has on the court, each individual has on trial, and it's really the statement that if the state wants to get you, they can get you. Think we've all jaywalked, we've all sped, we've all done things that objectively, like if you go through line by line on the code, you can definitely find something that you've done wrong. And it's really a question of authority, it's really a question of fairness, it's really a question of justice and judgment, and can we ever really get a fair trial? And this book was unfinished, it was never actually completed by Kafka, but I think it makes the ending so much better because it's abrupt, it's sudden. I'm not going to spoil the ending to you, but when you read it, you're going to get to the end and take it from the perspective of it's finished. It makes it so much better. I feel like if Kafka had finished it, it would have made it more convoluted, it would have continued on, it would have dragged on, but I think the abruptness is perfect, and it really makes the allegory and the message much deeper. But yeah, that's my second favorite book. The last book, I've talked about this book so many times. I've said this book is the best book I've ever read so many times, but like I must have read like 100 books, maybe 200 books since I first reviewed this book, and it's still up there. It's still number one on the list. It's still the deepest book I've ever read, and I will briefly give you an introduction to this book, but I don't want to spoil anything. I don't want to make it so that you don't pick this book up, so I'm gonna keep it as restricted as I possibly can. But the Book of Mere Dad is a book that is not talked about very often. I just don't think it, for whatever reason, it didn't get its critical acclaim, but it truly is one of the most poetic, one of the most inspiring, one of the most wise books that you will ever read. And you turn the page and it reads like something that you aren't supposed to read. It reads like a book that should have been banned because it is so deep, it is so complex, it makes you feel like you're reading the secrets of the universe, and it does it in the form of a narrative, it does it in the form of an inspiring story. And the story basically goes that after Noah's Ark, they wanted to set up a monastery that basically stopped the next flood and stopped the next fall of man. And this monastery was set up, and after years went by, Adam's long gone. The monastery really gets away from the goal. The monastery gets away from helping people, and it becomes a place of worship, a place of profit. They have this fair every year, and then one day this poor traveler shows up, and his name is Mere Dad, obviously, and he doesn't speak for 7 years. And after 7 years, he begins to speak, and he begins to say prophetic things. And these prophetic things begin to sway the monks that have already been there. There's a monk that tries to sabotage him. Basically it's like intertwined between this story and some of the deepest wisdom, some of the deepest advice that you've ever read. If you've ever read The Prophet, it's The Prophet times 2. It's The Prophet with a better story. It's The Prophet with some payoff behind it, not just the prophet saying words. And the way it's done, it doesn't read like a book that a man wrote. It reads like, if you read the Bible, it's so intertwined, it's so perfect, it's so prophetic, it's very unique in that aspect. But I think the Book of Mere Dad comes very close in the allegory and the symbolism in just everything that goes into this book is just so beautiful. And I really want you to pick this up because this is something that if you read will stick with you for the rest of your life, and it's stuck with me. I read so many things, and for me to say you need to read this book, like I'm telling you, like I love reading a lot of different things, but this is a book that I will always say is my favorite book and is the best book I've ever read. I love you guys so much. I will try to link all of these books at the end. If I don't, it's just because I'm lazy. I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for all the support. If you want more from me, if you want my writings, go ahead, join my community. Peace out. Catch you in the next one.